Hey, this is Kevin here at IMTS CDL Training School. I'm going to be doing a underhood approach and an underhood vehicle inspection. So if we walk up to my vehicle, what I'm going to be doing is looking underneath my vehicle for any puddles, coolant leaks, transmission fluid leaks, oil leaks, or wires hanging down. And I'm going to do that as I approach my vehicle, looking underneath it. I'm also going to be looking for the tractor to be leaning from the right or to the left. The other things I'm going to be looking at are the marker lights, that they're all in place, they're not cracked or broken, and they are of the proper color, which would be amber or orange. The next thing I'm going to be looking at is my mirrors. If you have mirrors on your hood, if they're securely mounted, they're not damaged. Also, my headlight assemblies, I'm going to note these headlight assemblies have the brights, the regular beams, and they also have the turn signals in them with an amber or orange turn signal bulb. And they are both not broken, they're not cracked, and they're clear. After that, I'd like to pop the engine hood, and then we're going to start off on the passenger side of the hood, showing you the two components, actually three components on the passenger side. What I'm going to point out here are three different components. We have our alternator, our water pump, and our coolant reservoir. I'll start off with the water pump. It's located down inside here. It can be shaft driven or belt driven, but this one is belt driven. This water pump is securely mounted. It is not cracked, broken, or damaged, or leaking. It is not missing any nuts or bolts. And the belt play is not more than 3/4 of an inch. Next, I'd like to point out to you is the alternator. The alternator is securely mounted. It's not missing any nuts or bolts. It is not cracked or damaged, broken. The wiring coming from the alternator is not cut, frayed, or worn. It is not burnt. And then the hoses coming from the water pump lead up to the coolant reservoir. No abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and are not leaking. The couplings at each end are securely mounted and they're not leaking. Next thing I'd like to show you is the coolant reservoir. It is securely mounted. It is not cracked, broken, damaged. It is not leaking. Also, the reservoir cap is on tight. It is also filled to the proper level. That would conclude my inspection on the passenger side of the vehicle. The other components on this side of the vehicle, I will be showing you on the other side, on the driver's side of the vehicle. Okay, so now we're on the driver's side of the tractor. I'm going to start pointing out some things that are unique over here. The first thing we want to look at is the oil dipstick tube. This is where I check the oil level. I pull the dipstick tube out, I would wipe it off, I'd put it back in, I pull it out again, and then I check to make sure that it's between the minimum and the maximum levels. If it were low, over here is where I would remove the cap and I would fill it with oil. Next thing we're going to talk about is the air compressor, which is not belt driven. It could be, and it is not. This is direct drive. It is securely mounted. It is not cracked or broken or damaged. It's not missing any hardware, and it is not leaking. The air line coming from the compressor, it's not cracked or worn or frayed, and it is not leaking. The couplings are secure and they are not leaking. The next thing I'd like to point out is the power steering pump. It is located down here. It is also direct driven. It may be belt driven. This is direct drive. It is securely mounted. It is not damaged or broken, and it is not leaking. The hoses coming from the power steering pump are securely mounted. There are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and they are not leaking. The couplings on either end of the hoses are securely mounted, and they are not leaking. This here is the power steering pump reservoir. This reservoir is securely mounted. It's not cracked or damaged, and it also is not leaking and filled to its proper level. Follow the hose down here. The hose is securely mounted. There is no abrasion, bulges, or cuts in this hose, and it is not leaking. The couplings are secure on each end and they are not leaking. Now we're going to talk about the steering shaft assembly. The steering shaft assembly is right here. At the top and the bottom of this are joints. Those joints are solid. They're not loose. They're not damaged. They're not missing anything. This is not bent. It's not cracked. It's not broken. When you come down here, the next thing I'm going to point out is the steering gear box. The steering gear box is securely mounted. It is not cracked, broken, or damaged, and it also is not leaking. Now we're going to go into, here's the other hose coming from the steering gear box. It is securely mounted. There are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts in that hose, and it is not leaking. And the couplings are securely mounted and not leaking. Now we're going to look at the pitman arm, the drag link, and the spindle. And we're going to look at the upper and lower spindles. They are not broken, they're not bent, they're not damaged. There are also 3 castle nuts in place. Come around here, we'll show them the castle nuts. There are 3 castle nuts in place. One's there, and one is here. And they all 3 have their cotter keys, and also with our tie rod that goes across. It is not bent, broken, or damaged. The next thing I'd like to point out in our suspension system is our front hangers and our rear hangers are securely mounted. They're not bent, broken, or damaged. They're not missing any nuts or bolts. The leaf springs. This has a multi-leaf spring. None of the leaves are bent or broken or damaged or missing. They're not shifted. The U-bolts are evenly spaced. They're not broken or damaged, and they are securely mounted at the bottom by nuts. The next thing is our bridge plate. The bridge plate is securely mounted. It's not broken or damaged. The last thing right here on the suspension I'd like to look at is our shock assembly. Our shock assembly is securely mounted. It's not missing any nuts or bolts, top or bottom. It is not broken, bent, or damaged, and it is not leaking. Our frame member is not cracked, broken, damaged. There are no excessive holes in it, and there are no repair welds. We're going to go into our brake lines first. Our brake lines have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and they are not leaking. They are secured at each end and not leaking. The next thing we'll talk about is our brake chamber. Our brake chamber is securely mounted. It's not broken or damaged. It is not leaking. The next thing we'll talk about is our push rod and our pin and our cotter key. The lever are not bent, broken, or damaged, and there is not 1 inch of pull with more than 1 inch of pull with our brakes released. The last thing here I'd like to talk about, or one of the things I also want to point out while we're up here, is our ABS line. It is not cut, worn, or frayed. It's just securely mounted. We'll come down here to our brakes. Our brake drum is securely mounted. It's not cracked or broken. It has no holes in it. The next thing would be our brake pad assembly. Our brake pad assembly it's securely mounted. It is not broken in any way or damaged, and it has not less than 1/4 inch of pad. Let's talk about our tire now. Our rim, so let's talk about our rim. Our rim has no cracks, it is not broken, and it has no repair welds. Inside or out, it is not cracked or broken and has no repair welds. Inner tire wall has no abrasions, no bulges, no cuts. It's not damaged. On the top of our tread here, we're going to look at this, that our tread is evenly worn and has not less than 4/30 seconds of tread. Going on the sidewall it has also no abrasions, bulges, or cuts and is in good shape. The tire pressure on these tires are between 95 and 110 pounds of pressure. Let's talk about our lug nuts that secure the wheel. The lug nuts are all tight. There are none missing. There are no rust trails that would be indicative, or shiny threads that would be indicative of a loose nut. All the spacers are in place. They're not cracked or broken, and they're not missing. Our hub seals, although you can't see them, our hub seals are securely mounted inside and out, no missing nuts or bolts, and they are not leaking, and they are filled to the proper level. And besides a very general inspection of my wiring and any other hoses inside my engine compartment will bring me around to the last thing I'd just like to note, maybe not necessary, but our washer fluid, to know where it's at, to know that it's filled up so we have enough washer fluid for inclement conditions. This would also complete my under the hood and my approach inspection, noting that anything on this side that's duplicated on the other side, I would check it in the same manner.